soon. So you're getting your attention. Thank you.
We have this under control.
You know, from experience,
If you believe that, the rest of the evening will go a lot easier.
Increasing the surface area of food. We're going to go ahead and get started. Ethan's going to try to pay attention and put slides for me as needed. This puts him in control. I will talk as fast as he puts the slides. Go ahead. Okay, there we go. Okay, this is the chemistry portion of tonight. And I need to warn you, I really like chemistry. I spent 3 years in freshman chemistry, and it was the best 3 years I ever had in college. And so, I want you to understand how amazing the ruminant animal is. The ruminant animal is just a completely amazing animal because in this rumen, there are all these populations of bacteria that break down chemical structures. We worry about whether it's Bermuda grass or fescue or Bahia grass. All of those rumen bacteria see is chemical structures. They either see cellulose or they see starch. Move it up. I'm not loud enough.
That's what they're saying.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we just don't know where you are in the book.
We don't know where I am in the book. Carbohydrate digestion and acidosis.
the pamphlet that you got is in the center of that pamphlet.
Oh, so I know.
Yeah,
I
it's
get it.
that green pamphlet.
Yeah, see, this is the problem. I tend to fluctuate, so whatever I said the order was when I sent it to him, it's probably a lie. Because I think about what I've covered and then want to change it. Okay. I'll wait a second until everyone's got it together. In the meantime, I can just play with mine. It goes away, it comes back.
I didn't go to school, I go. Dumb as shit. Thank you.
Everybody ready?
Yeah,
Okay.
First test.
it's on page 1. Okay.
I'm looking into the
Did you find it?
Oh, I'm sorry. This is glucose. It's a simple sugar. There are 6 carbons in glucose. There's a carbon here, 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 here. Starch and cellulose are both made from glucose. The only difference between starch and cellulose is how those glucose units are linked. This top part is starch. It's got what's called an alpha linkage. This is cellulose. It's got what's called beta linkage. It's just the way that the glucose units are linked. So in the rumen, about 12% of the bacterial populations that are in the rumen are cellulose digesters. about 10 or 12% are starch digesters. Now, if this was a real picture, this would go on out several thousand more glucose units, and the rest of the bacteria break starch or cellulose into 2 or 3 units so that the other bacterial species can go in down there and break them down further. But the amazing thing is that those bacterial species all produce different end products, which we'll hit. Okay. So, this is probably one of the most important graphs I'm going to show you for understanding ruminant nutrition. If I feed 100% forage diet, I get about 80% acetate, and I'm going to show you what this is. This is a 3-carbon volatile fatty acid. I get about 16% propionate. I'm just going to say butyrate's always around 8 to 10%. As I go down from this grazing diet down to a feedlot diet that is about 80% grain, acetate drops from about 70% down to about 50%. Propionate just about doubles. Propionate goes from 15, 16% up to 30 to 32%. Okay. Why is that important? It's important because acetate, and this is the chemical formula, it's used primarily in fatty acid synthesis for back fat and seam fat. It is also used in milk fat, which is critical to newborn calves. Propionate is converted to glucose in the liver. Butyrate always goes to fatty acid synthesis, and it either goes to seam fat, back fat, or fat in the mammary gland. So from this slide, even though this is a feedlot class, the one thing that I would like you to know, just based upon the chemistry of this, in a dairy situation where we want more milk, what do we feed the dairy cattle to get them to give more milk? We feed them grain. If we're feeding a high forage diet and we want them to give more milk, we give them grain. But we're taking that milk from the cow. If you've got a cow herd and you're trying to get more energy to a newborn calf, is supplementing that cow who's just had a calf with grain a good idea? I say no. I say no because it creates mastitis. Those young calves can only consume a given amount of feed. And when you are producing more milk than that calf can consume, think of a calf in this first month. We're going into peak lactation on a lactation curve. But those calves are at their smallest point in life ever. If that cow is producing more milk that's not being used, she gets bulbous udders. She gets mastitis. So one of the first things I do if I walk onto a farm and it's a cow-calf operation and someone tells me they're having a problem with their calves, I don't even need to see a calf. I just need to see the udders on the cows to go in and see whether they're telling me the truth when they tell me they're not feeding any grain. Okay? The other thing here is, if I want to increase the energy of milk to that newborn calf, I want to do everything I can to increase the digestibility of the forage. In my opinion, shop cut balers are the best thing to come down the road for the cow-calf producer in the last 20 years. Because it takes a particle size down from, well, I'm from Ohio where we get a lot of rain, and we have, up there, we have a lot of timothy, a lot of orchard grass, and we cut that stuff, first cutting maybe 3.5 feet high. Okay? How small is a particle of forage when it leaves the rumen? About 1/2 inch. The average particle size is 1/25 of an inch. So think about how much chewing and regurgitation and chewing or cut that cow has to do to break that forage down. Hey, it's the same thing in a feedlot. If you've got a steer stuffer and a round bale out there and the forage that those cattle are eating is long stem,
They're using a lot of energy to get that forage that's taking up space in the ruminant and feedlot. We want that rumen occupied with grain, not forage. And it goes back to this. It goes to propionate. Okay. This is my only slide that I don't have my stuff taken off of. High grain diets result in an increase in propionate. Propionate is the only glucogenic fatty acid, which means it's the only fatty acid converted to glucose in the liver. Higher levels of glucose production in the liver result in a greater average daily gain, greater feed efficiency, and increased marbling. Because I want you to understand one thing. From a neonatal standpoint, fat cells for intramuscular fat or marbling are a completely different source in a fetus from back fat and seam fat cells. They have two different origins. Back fat and seam fat cells use acetate to grow. Intramuscular fat, marbling, uses glucose. Why is that important? It's important because if we're backgrounding cattle, and you send cattle to a feedlot, and you've got good quality pastures, but you send your yearling steers or your 14-month-old steers to a feedlot, and they're fleshy, they've got 4/10 of an inch of back fat on them probably, coming off as stalkers off of good grass. That 4/10 of an inch of back fat on a preliminary yield grade is already a preliminary yield grade of 3. 2/10 of an inch of back fat has a preliminary yield grade of 2. 2.5 I'm sorry. 2/10, 4/10 has a preliminary yield grade of 3. 6/10 has a preliminary yield grade of 3.5. You're going to have to hear one thing from me throughout this. I'm not going to stay with one little system. I'm not going to say this is digestion and this is back fat and this is marbling and this is efficiency, and they're not intertwined. It seems like I'm bouncing around, but I want you to understand it's all connected. When you put a steer into a feedlot, if it goes in with 4/10 of an inch of back fat and it's preliminary yield grade 3, and you put it on a corn diet, corn has twice the energy density of forage. It's got twice the digestibility of forage. 1 pound of corn gives the same amount of digestible energy to that animal as 4 pounds of forage, dry forage. Okay? Those cattle, once they get in the feedlot, they never get thinner. They always put on more fat. We've made couch potatoes out of them. We're giving them as much energy as they can eat, and we're trying to get marbling and we're trying to get gain. But the risk is, if they go in really fleshy, they're going to get a yield grade 4 discount that right now is 20 to 25 cents a hundredweight. You wonder why when you go to a sale barn, those thin calves may be in more demand than a fleshed calf? Really good feedlot operators know how to keep a thin calf healthy, but they have more room to work with because they can get them on feed and they can still get a yield grade 3. And this goes back to glucose and acetate. Okay, Keith. Yes, sir.
And what you're talking about there, you're talking about
Hey, put you on Rockwell.
somebody.
Somebody.
Okay. What is silage count as?
Silage, corn silage, on a dry matter basis, is about 50% corn and about 50% forage.
So that would not be the high concentrated.
No, Keith, can you flip that up one, please? Sorry.
Back.
Yeah. 2. One more. To the chart. Sorry. To the chart. Silage is right in here. Silage is right in here. I'm going to tell you right now, don't worry so much about the numbers, know this from this chart. When I am feeding a forage diet, I'm getting at least 70% acetate, about 15% propionate. When I go to a high grain diet, propionate doubles. Acetate's always 50%, no matter what we do, no matter what we feed. There's no magic to get around what the bacteria are producing. Spent 50 years trying, nature still wins. So the bottom line is, on any diet, even a high grain diet, we're going to get back fat and seed fat. Showed you that last week, how much fat there is, internal fat. And so the reality of it is, we're going to have internal fat in these things. What we're trying to do is get as efficient gain as we can and put on as great an average daily gain as we can. I'm going to take that away from you just for a second because I know where it will go. There we go. This, hierarchy of nutrient use, maintenance, development, growth, lactation, reproduction, and fattening. This is the hierarchy in which nutrients are used, all nutrients. So the first thing that animal has to do is maintain itself. That's about 80% of feed intake for beef cattle. In feedlot cattle, 80% of feed goes to maintenance. Before, on these growing calves and newly weaned calves, before they're developing things like still an immune system, as they're growing, they have to develop a circulatory system before you get lean growth. Now, hopefully, we aren't lactating and reproducing in a feedlot, but they're the next two, and finally, fattening is last. Okay. So, the order of energy goes to brain and central nervous system, skeleton, the visceral organs, skeletal muscle, and adipose tissue. So, fat is the last thing that is put down. But I want you to understand it's not age, it's every day. It's every day depending on the intake of the cow. Okay. So, not all average daily gain is the same. The rumen, reticulum, omasum, abomasum, small intestine, large intestine, they all increase in weight as the forage content of the diet increases. How many of you have heard the term hay belly? Yeah, you get hay belly on cattle that are eating round bales that are not chop cut. I have been in a situation where I have seen cows in the north starve to death in the winter without protein supplementation, where their hay feeders were filled with indigestible hay because it took more energy to digest that hay than their nutrient requirements. And then you get a drop in temperature and they die. They are starving to death with feed because of this. Because these organs are taking 40 to 50% of that animal's daily energy intake and 30 to 40% of that animal's daily protein intake just to maintain those organs before anything is used for any kind of gain. Okay. So, where I want to go from here is I want to talk to you about grain processing. And when we're dealing with feedlots, this becomes a huge issue. And this data is a little bit old, but Fred Owens from Oklahoma State was the best starch scientist, at least of my generation. And he did a study, an analysis, looking at all the publications in the Journal of Animal Sciences, went back about 10 years. And the number of cattle and what I'm going to show you, because I'm not going to look at barley, millet, or wheat. I'm just going to look at corn because it's mostly what we feed and it's a reliable database. It has enough numbers. Okay. So from a corn standpoint, average daily gain, pounds per day, cattle fed to grains processed by various methods, and we're just focusing on corn. In this database, corn actually gave the highest daily feed intake. If these these letters are different, they're statistically different. So A is different from B, B is different from C. If it has a B and a C, it's not different from either of these, but it's different from dry roll or ground corn. So if we want to increase feed intake, and that's our only motive, dry corn gives you more feed intake than high moisture, steam rolled, or steam flaked, or whole. Okay. However, if I look at average daily gain, dry rolled corn and whole corn and steam flake corn were all statistically the same. They all have an A. I forgot to make that red. Yes?
Extruded corn, would that be closest to?
Steam flake, steam rolled, extruded, they all gelatinize. They're all basically interchangeable. Different terms, but the basic starch chemistry is the same. Because in a good steam flake, what you're doing is you're gelatinizing the corn. When you extrude corn, you're gelatinizing it. So it's the same type of thing.
Well, with the extruded, it's ground into a small particle size
Yeah.
first. So you should have better starch hydrolyzation, right?
You should. It's good and bad.
Okay.
I'll show you the pluses and the minuses. It's all how it's done. So, what I want you to see here is the lowest is high moisture corn on an average daily gain. Well, if you go down to big feedlots in western Kansas or Nebraska, you're going to see huge mounds of high moisture corn. You're going to see it because they're feeding tens of thousands of cattle, and that's the best way to store that amount of corn. But when you ferment something in these high moisture corn situations, you're using starch to create lactic acid so that the feed is preserved. When you do that, you lose about 10% of the energy value of the feed because you're using up starch to create an acid, and a form of acid that's not beneficial to animal growth. Okay, next slide. If I look at, from a feed to gain standpoint, the two most efficient forms of corn are steam rolled or steam flake and whole, and the two poorest are dry rolled and high moisture. And 90% of you in the audience right now don't believe this, because we are taught to grind corn because you can see a whole kernel. And the rest of this talk is going to be on why this is based on reality and science. Okay, if I look at total tract digestibility in this one study, going from 0 to 21% roughage in a feedlot diet. With 0, this is with whole shell corn diets. With no roughage, I'm about 96% digestibility. When I get in here, I'm around 94, 95% digestibility, total tract. If I look at total tract in another study, it's around 91%. If you look down here at steam flake, it's about 98%. I've looked at this type of data for 30 years. I give whole shell corn a total tract digestibility of about 95%. I give steam flake corn a digestibility total tract of about 99%. It gets really tricky though because it's not digested in the same place. When I have steam flake corn, or I gelatinize the corn, or I make the particle size smaller, I am improving the rumen digestibility. I don't have much starch entering the small intestine. So here's some interesting thing that certified Angus beef has looked at for 30 years. If you track where cattle marble the least, if I have the same genetics and I track where they marble the most, do you think they marble the best in western Kansas feedlots or in Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota feedlots? Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota. Because glucose is the source of energy for intramuscular fat, from artery. About 800 grams, just under 800 grams, about 1.75 pounds
of glucose are absorbed from the small intestine every day if it's presented to it. That glucose that's absorbed from the small intestine is used 27% more efficient by the animal than breaking it down to propionate and converting the two propionate molecules to glucose in the liver. How many of you at this point are completely confused? Okay, good. I'm going to come back to you. We're going to cover this several times. Okay, what am I saying? Yes?
Can I ask on your chart here, because most folks that do their own feed, they either grind it or use crack, and those look like the worst two.
They are.
Why is cracked actually worse than grain?
Well, cracked and ground are about the same. I'm going to show you pictures. It all deals with particle size and acidosis and how much stress we're putting on the digestive tract. So let me give you a 2-minute recap, and I promise you're out of here by 1:30 or 2 this morning. I have to drive too. So, Tammy, this just became a 6-week school to be continued sometime. If I feed forage, I get more acetate. If I feed grain, I get more propionate.
Right.
If I have high moisture corn, I lose starch for the ensiling for fermentation. If I feed a steam flake corn, I get about 99% total tract starch digestibility. That 99% total tract starch digestibility with anything that is gelatinized or has steam put, it occurs in the rumen. There are hundreds of research papers. It is converted to propionate, which is converted to glucose in the liver. If I feed whole corn, I get corn bypassing the rumen to the small intestine. Now what you have to remember is, if you got a 5-gallon bucket and you've got a cow herd, and you go out in these mature cows and you put 5 gallons of whole shelled corn in a trough, day and a half later, you're going to see a lot of whole shelled corn in the manure. They're mature. Mature cows go. Calves that we are feeding, a bunch of research has been done, the calves chew the grain. And so if I feed whole corn to a 600, 800 pound calf in the rumen, and we know this from fish-related studies where we put that rumen cannula in and take samples, 80% of that corn is coarse ground corn when it hits the rumen. They chew less as they get older. Now here's the other thing. Some of you who have gotten to know me over the last 5 years know that something just ain't right with me. It's because I spent about 20 years putting fecal bag samples on feedlot steers in research settings, washing all that manure over screens, and what I can promise you is that manure with whole shell corn, those full kernels, that nice seed coat, the mucus just slides right off. What you don't see are the hundreds of small particles that the mucus doesn't slide off, and they're too small to really see them. Trust me, it really is 95% starch digestibility, but we have to control it. We control it, okay, go ahead. We control it with the amount of fiber we feed and the particle size. Okay, so what are some of the issues with grinding corn? This is whole corn. If I had to crack corn, this is as fine as I would want it in a feedlot. Now, there's a little problem with this. How many of you can crack corn, grind corn, and get it all looking like this without a bunch of fines? You can. And then you're going to pelletize it after you gelatinize it.
Well, I don't use a roller, I use a corn cutter.
Okay.
And it's really good about not producing fine.
I'm going to talk to everyone else in the room.
Sorry.
That's okay. There are technologies, but one person raised their hand because it's in a commercial setting. On grinders on the farm, you get a lot of fines. A lot of fines. Hammer mills, a lot of fines. I want you to see these 4 pictures that are all in these little white containers. Do those look different to you? Can you tell that it goes from here to there as fineness?
I want you to understand something. Those are from 4 separate weeks in a research feed mill using the exact same speed with the exact same roller setting.
All 4 of them?
All 4 of them. Why would they be so different?
Length of time?
Huh?
Length of time?
Nope, exact same time, exact same setting. Moisture, when? That's the correct answer. Starch is a crystalline structure. Crystalline structures shatter. If corn is dried in the field slowly and naturally and goes down to 14% moisture, when you grind it, it's going to look like this. If corn is in the field at 20%, 18%, 22%, the more heat you have to put to it, the more that crystalline structure gets small cracks in it. Those glucose units that are linked in a crystal structure, they shatter. So that when you process them, they go like this. Now here's the bad side of this story. This occurred in February in 2016. In February 2016, in spring semester, I was teaching beef production in Columbus. A research feed mill was an hour and a half north where I worked. So the time that I was in Columbus, driving back and forth every day to teach, I didn't see this until we hit here. When we hit here, we took feed samples every week, and we did dry matter analyses, and we saved them. And I came back because the cattle were going off feed. And I saw them here, and they delivered one more load, and we did not feed this because the cattle were thrown off of feed horribly. That is the reason ground corn, cracked corn, is dangerous. Because if it's whole, or it's steam flaked, or it's steam rolled, or it's reconstituted, or it's gelatinized, I get a uniform product. I can work with any uniform product. What I can't work with is a highly variable product. Okay. So if I look at grains ranked by their rate of ruminal starch digestion, wheat and barley are the fastest. High moisture corn is next, followed by steam flake, dry rolled maize, and finally dry rolled grain sorghum. Now you have to understand something about how things are digested in the rumen. The bacteria attach. So